Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
This episode of Dental Business RX was inspired by you, our listeners. Back in episode 3, which was called A New Take on the Dental Receptionist Position, we introduced the idea of how important this position actually is and gave you a few tips on how to improve. I had a couple guests on, Jeff Santone and Sabri Bloomberg, to discuss things you could do to improve. Now, since that episode, I have gotten a ton of follow-up questions relating to this position. You know, what's the ideal candidate like? How do you train them? What should you train them on? And so on. So I knew I had to do an episode on that subject. It was just a matter of timing. So here we are. So for this week's episode, I want to cover most, if not all, the issues that were brought up. We're calling it Building the Perfect Receptionist. My name is Jeff Bloomberg, and I'm your host. And my plan in this episode is to cover about 5 or 6 different points. I want to revisit the issues. Why is this such a big problem? And then I want to look at a few of the organizational aspects of reception, as far as how it actually works and where it goes wrong. Then I want to look at how you would want to staff this position, who is the ideal candidate, what attitude they should have, as well as what you should be training them on and how to train them. So with that, let's just jump right in. Let's take a look at why is this such a problem again. Maybe you missed that episode, but this is something you should definitely be thinking with. Well, there's the basic problem, if you have problems at reception, that we all can think with, which is your receptionist is the first impression, the first human interaction that someone is going to have with your practice. Maybe they saw your website, a new patient. By they, I mean new patients. They see your website and they like it and they call. This is their first human interaction. And this is where you have to, and I know this is tough as a business owner, but especially for your own business, but you have to sometimes approach your business and try to think like a consumer. Think like a consumer would if they knew nothing about your office. This is something I do with marketing too. Think like the person who's actually receiving it, right? What would they think of this? And so you have to think like a consumer here. If I'm calling your office, what type of an impression would I get if I talk to the person answering the phone? And they don't necessarily even have to be unfriendly or rude. Maybe they can't answer any of my questions. Maybe they seem a bit scatterbrained. They're all over the place. But whatever impression I get, that is going to have some influence on my opinion of your office and whether I'm going to want to schedule or not. Now, you can always improve if a first impression was bad, but why start off on the wrong foot, right? So that's the no-brainer part of it. We all know that first impressions, last forever and so on, right? The bigger issue relating to reception is the new patient waste. There's a company called Viva Concept. They're a marketing company. Did a study on this, just on new patient call conversions. And what they did is they listened to, this was years ago, 10,000 new patient phone calls, that the software recorded for these various offices. Now, what they found is out of 10,000 calls, and these were primarily calls in the U.S., I think there might have been a few in Canada, I'm not sure. But out of these 10,000 phone calls, the average conversion rate, meaning how many of these patients actually went ahead and scheduled, was less than 23%. I think it was 22.8%. I'll say that again. So out of 10,000 phone calls, less than 23% actually scheduled. So now if you do the math in your office, if you're the average dental practice in the United States, and you're seeing 23 new patients a month, chances are you're getting 100 new patient phone calls per month. And if we don't think with this, we can go a little wrong-headed on it, meaning, I'm only getting 23 new patients. I want to get 40. So the first thing I'm going to do is send out a bunch of mail, or I'm going to go do a bunch more internet marketing, or I'm going to do this and do that. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do these things, but it's sort of like filling a bucket with a big hole in it. If you don't also do something to resolve the reception position, you're filling the bucket with a hole. Where's the water going to go? It's going to go out the hole. So you want to make sure that you have this position at least adequately represented in your office. At the same time, you're launching any kind of a marketing effort. And there's financial waste associated with it too. I mean, that's again pretty obvious. If I spend $5,000, let's say, on an external marketing effort, let's say a postcard to my area. So I send a postcard out and I get 100 phone calls off this postcard. All right. Well, if I'm the average dental practice, 23 of these patients are scheduling. Great. Which means that 77 are not. Now, you're not going to schedule everybody, but let's say a good conversion rate is, 70%, 80%, 90%. That's a good conversion rate. Let's take 80 as a baseline here. So if I convert 80%, I get 80 new patients. If I'm the average office, I'm converting 23%. That's 23 new patients. So if reception isn't properly handled in my office, I'm losing 57 new patients a month. So think about this in that I could go out and spend tons without handling my receptionist. Say they're the average receptionist converting 23%. And mind you, they're not, it doesn't necessarily make them bad, right? It does not make them bad. They just may not know what they're doing and what the purpose of their job is, which I'll talk about a little bit later in the episode. But let's say I'm spending $5,000 a month and I get those 100 phone calls. And we're converting 23%. So I go spend a bunch more money on other things because I want 40 or 50 new patients a month. Well, if I had just handled my reception area, I probably could have gotten 40 to 50 new patients a month by doing next to nothing, just continuing the marketing I was already doing, you see? So one thing to keep in mind as you're setting your reception area up, you obviously track new patients in your practice. Every dentist, for the most part, does. How many new patients your software does? How many new patients am I getting a month? One other statistic, if you're putting this reception area together, is you want to track number of new contacts. We call it new reaches, reaches into your office. It might be new inquiries, whatever you want to call this thing, okay? These are people contacting your office for the first time as a potential new patient. So if I sent out postcards, I spent $5,000 and I get 100 new reaches and I only get 23 new patients, well, I know I have a problem. And one thing to keep an eye on, and I know I tend to digress a bit, I apologize, folks, is if you were to go and let's say you have this receptionist, they only converted 23 new patients out of 100 calls. What am I going to hear about the other 57 that we should have converted? Oh, they were just shoppers. They wanted us to take their insurance, something. So you're going to want to listen to these calls eventually, which again, I'll talk about, but this is something you want to definitely track. Number of new reaches coming into the practice, because that's what tells you if your marketing is working, not new patients. New patients tells you if your receptionist is working. Well, unless you're getting no new reaches, in which case your marketing's not. Anyway, so that's the overview of the problem. Your receptionist is in an important position. They are a partner in your marketing. So you definitely want to make sure that whoever is answering the phone in your office is really on the ball. Which brings us to the organizational aspects of this position. If you take a look in the average office, we call anybody at the front desk, the front desk, right? We're naming them after the furniture. And maybe they don't have a delineation of specific job duties or functions. And that's a mistake. We've talked about that in other episodes. We go out very extensively on the MGE program. But ideally, if you have someone on a job at the front, you want them allocated to a certain area of control or responsibility, a financial coordinator, a schedule coordinator, etc. But let's look at this receptionist for a second, because you may have organizational issues that you're not even aware of depending on the amount of volume you have coming into your practice. So in the average office, a receptionist does what? They answer the phone, they schedule patients, they schedule new patients, they greet people when they're coming in, they make copies, they do all kinds of stuff, right? Maybe send letters out, etc. All right, well, there's several different functions with this whole process I'm talking about here, from answering the phone to scheduling a new patient. And as an office gets bigger, you would actually split these functions up a bit. And the reason I'm getting into this is because if you have an office where you have all this traffic coming into somebody just called the receptionist, that will affect your new patients, not because your receptionist is no good, but because they actually don't have appropriate amounts of time to allocate to new patient intake. So what are these functions? You have a receptionist. What is a receptionist supposed to do? Answer the phone, route communication. That's a receptionist's job, essentially. Greet patients as they come in, make sure that they're seated, make sure that they get to the back and someone's in communication with them if they have any kind of a wait. They keep the reception area looking smart and clean, and that's essentially what they're doing. They're making sure that the practice communication is flowing well, all right? Then you have a scheduling function. So what's the scheduler do? They put together a productive schedule and schedule patients. Now, in a bigger office, you might even have what we call a new patient coordinator. What would a new patient coordinator do? they would handle new patient calls. So get the idea of how this might flow. You have a smaller office, in a real small office. The office manager is probably the receptionist, the scheduler, the financial coordinator, the treatment coordinator, maybe even the dental assistant. But as an office grows, we may have somebody that we call a receptionist who answers the phone and schedules patients, which would include new patients. Now, as the office starts to grow or the volume increases, let's say you're getting 8, 10 new patient calls a day. Well, that might be tough to handle for somebody who's supposed to be answering phones, scheduling patients, doing walkout statements, etc. As the volume increases, you would probably split up these functions a little bit. You might have somebody who's the receptionist and someone who is the scheduler. Then the scheduler can handle new patients and patients of record and getting them on the book. But let's say the new patient volume even goes up further to where someone could justifiably be on the phone for hours a day with potential new patients. And you have some offices running different types of marketing funnels where what they're getting is not just new patient call-ins, they're getting contact us forms that are being filled out on a website or some type of an online sales funnel with a landing page. Well, so they're making calls out to these potential patients as well as receiving calls from potential patients. Well, if you get that busy, then you might even split that position off again to where you now have a new patient coordinator. What's this new patient coordinator doing? They're answering new patient calls and making calls out. So this has everything to do with your volume. So what you're going to want to do, because what you don't want to have happen is this. I'm your receptionist, because to a proper new patient call, there's a direct index to some degree, assuming that I'm not just, talking about a bunch of random nothings, assuming I'm all business and I'm really establishing good communication with a potential new patient, I'm probably going to spend 8, 9, maybe at least 6, 7 minutes on the phone with the new patient because there's things you want me to ask the new patient. So I want you to imagine for a second, I'm your receptionist, I get a new patient call, and then I've got a patient walking up to the front that I have to check out, all right? And then the phone's ringing again. If anything, I'm going to try and execute this call, but how many times am I putting this potential new patient on hold? Probably quite a bit. I'm also going to feel scattered myself, and that will kill the conversion rate to a degree. That's why some of these corporate offices have just set up, and we actually have had clients do this too. They're not corporate, but if they have a lot of new patient volume, they've set up whole separate call centers. Like they have someone in another room. They're not even at the front desk taking new patient calls to schedule these new patients because they have that much volume. It makes sense. You want someone who is completely distraction free, and then they schedule the patient, easy peasy, right? Not a problem. So you definitely want to keep an eye on the volume at the front. If you have a lot of new patient communication coming in, you may want to split this off somehow. If you've got one person handling this and your entire patient schedule, you might want to split reception and scheduling. If you have reception and scheduling split and you have a ton of new patient intake, you might need a new patient coordinator, in which case then the receptionist is answering the phone and getting them over to the new patient coordinator, right? So this is the organizational aspects of it because again, you could have somebody who's a really good candidate or they do the job very well as far as handling new patient phone calls if they had the time to do it. So definitely check your volume and be realistic. Could someone actually handle all these calls with enough time spent, because you don't want this person feeling, harassed because they have so much to do. You want them to be able to focus, their attention is on that person, and they can talk to them at length. All right, so what type of candidate, what type of person are we looking for this position? We want someone who's upbeat. We want someone who can communicate. If you're interviewing a prospective receptionist or a new patient coordinator, and really anybody at your front desk, if they can't look at you during the interview, they're looking at the floor the whole time, or they say 3 words during the interview, that's not a good candidate. We're looking for someone who is friendly. And we're also looking for someone who is willing to tell somebody what to do in a nice way. If, they're not willing to direct people, we need to schedule you at 3 o'clock, that's not going to make an ideal receptionist, scheduler, or a new patient coordinator, right? And the other thing I would say is even if the candidate is a good candidate, the last thing I would do if I hire somebody new for the office, especially if they have no prior experience, is make their first job the receptionist. That's just a bad idea. Why would I take, and this is what happens, folks. We get our newest employee, good, you're the receptionist. So yeah, I spent $10,000 on marketing this month. Hope you do okay. It's a bit silly in a way. Put them on something where they can actually help and you can get an idea of how good of a job this person can do or how good of a fit they are for the office. Maybe they could help the office manager out or help the scheduler out, get people on the phone, maybe do reactivation calls. But I definitely would not be having them answer incoming communication for your receptionist position right off the bat. Now, what do we want to train this person on? Now, this assumes that you have basic onboarding things in place. You know, they're oriented to your office. They understand the mission statement of your office. They've read your basic policy manual, so they know, when they get paid and whatnot. So they're oriented to being in your practice as an employee. So now how are we going to start training them? And keep in mind, we have them doing something else at the same time. We're having them do something to help. They're reactivating patients. They're helping the office manager. They're getting people on the phone for the scheduler. They're keeping the reception area clean, whatever we want them to do, right? To make sure that they can actually do something effective for the office. So what are we going to train them on? The first thing you want to train somebody like this on is you want to train them, why does their job exist? What is the purpose of their job? Why is it there? Why are they there? And I say this only because this is where even good candidates mess up. So you have a receptionist and they think their job is to be the gatekeeper. I'm the gatekeeper. No calls can get through. And it is funny. They're almost in a way sort of split personality. On the one hand, you don't want a bunch of stockbrokers and salespeople getting through to the doctor. But on the other, you don't want to take that same attitude and apply that to new patients. That's pretty bad, right? So they have to understand why they're there. What am I here to do? And again, we saw this on our mystery calls. Some receptionists think that they're there to be really nice and polite. That's why they're there. They're to be friendly. That's why they're there. Well, those are attributes you want them to have. But if I have a receptionist and their job is to get me new patients, that call in and get them scheduled, I would tell them that's why they're there. I want a lot of new patients. So I want you to, be friendly and helpful and all those things. But your purpose is to get people converted and onto the schedule. That's your purpose. I want them in the office. Right? So it's fine if they're a gatekeeper for this or that, but they have to sort of, be able to put on another hat very quickly. If they're the gatekeeper and they just took a call from, I don't know, you're an investment banker, they have to be able to, and now they get a new patient call, they have to be able to flip, put the different hat on. Now they're the friendly, helpful, happy receptionist that has all the time in the world to talk to this new patient. And their job is to get them in and on the schedule. And if you don't provide this purpose for somebody, you don't tell them this is why you're on this job, this is what, and we'll get into expectations in a second, people will have a tendency, if they don't hear this, to invent what they think you want them to do. People want to know why they're doing something. It's just sort of human nature. So if you don't tell them, they're going to invent why. So let's say you don't really get into much communication with your new receptionist and you have them on the job. And they're answering the phone, and one day they put through a call to the doctor that they shouldn't have. It was a salesperson or some rep from some company or whatever. And the doctor's like, why was I pulled away from a patient? Maybe the doctor's a bit miffed, right? Or maybe one of the other staff mentioned a shopper call that they just took, and the person was a bit of a problem, right? Well, now, because you haven't told the receptionist why they're there, what's their purpose, what's the reason for their job, what they're going to have a tendency to do is assume one. Well, I'm supposed to be hard, so I don't let calls through to the doctor, or shoppers are bad. They'll start to develop this idea. So my job's to keep shoppers away from the practice because they don't care about their teeth. People can adopt all types of weird ideas about things if you don't make it very clear as to why they're there. The other thing I caution you against that's sort of interesting, and we do this with every new receptionist we've ever hired. I've had the same receptionist here for a long time, probably going on 10 years, right? But here at MGE. But one of the first things we tell a new receptionist, because we also have a second receptionist, and we hired one for our California office as well. One of the first things we tell them is, listen, a small percentage of people are just not nice. They're just not nice. And you have to be aware of that and not think that everybody is like that. And here's why we tell them. If you have 20 patients come into your office in a day, let's say between you and hygiene, 20 patients come in, and 19 are any variant of really nice, really thankful, polite, etc., but one is just a real nasty jerk. Who is everybody talking about at the end of the day? Who's the front desk talking about? Who are you talking to your significant other about that night? You're not talking about the 19 people or that one patient that gave you a hug after you put their new veneers in. You're all talking about the jerk. we have a tendency to sort of snap to and focus on the negative at times. So you could have the receptionist get a call from somebody who's just a total jerk. And if they're not thinking with this, right, that look, some people are just jerks. I mean, you could come up with a better word for it. I don't know, just not nice, whatever. There are words I could think of I can't put on a podcast. But some people are just going to be like that. It's an infinitesimally small percentage of people. But don't get the idea that everybody's like that. Focus on the people who actually want our help. Right? Because if you don't, they'll start to think that, well, everybody's like this. Or it could also rattle them a bit, which is not nice, and you don't want that to happen to whoever's answering your phones. All right, so that's the first thing you want to cover. Why is this job there? Why do you have them? What's the purpose, right? Then you want to get into expected outcomes. Like, what is it you expect from this job? So look, I checked, we're getting 100 phone calls a month for new patient inquiries, or we're getting 200 a month. I expect 80% of the people calling in to get them in. Because if you don't, I expect for 80% of the people calling in to get scheduled and actually show up. That's what I want. That's why you're there. That's how I can tell you're doing a great job. Because if you don't make it clear what expectations are and clarify them, sometimes you get really weird stuff. Like, let's say I hired a schedule coordinator and you just told them, look, I haven't been very busy. I want my schedule full. Well, I guarantee you I could walk into your office on Monday. Let's say your Tuesday is empty. I could fill your Tuesday. You wouldn't produce anything. You'd have a bunch of denture relines or whatever. I could fill it with something. So a full schedule isn't necessarily productive. So when you're hiring a scheduler or you're putting a scheduler on the job, you would explain the outcome. I need a productive schedule. I need to efficiently schedule. This is how much I need to produce, etc. Well, the same thing goes for reception. You want to make sure your receptionist knows what they're working toward. This is the percentage of conversions I expect you to be at. And maybe they're not at that right off the bat. But they start at 30% or 40%, then they get to 50 and so on. And then they get the idea that they're actually improving and they're moving towards what you have as an expectation for them. The next thing you want to go over is they should be able to answer basic questions. Nothing is more annoying when you call a business and the person answering the phone seems amateurish. They have to put you on hold constantly to ask questions. And you're just thinking, who are they asking questions of? Can I just talk to that person? Right? They don't seem to know what they're talking about. They don't seem very certain in what they're saying. So they have to understand how to answer basic questions about the office. They have to understand what they're scheduling for and why, if they're scheduling new patient appointments. A second opinion is this, a new patient initial is that. They have to understand what they're scheduling for, why they're scheduling for it, and all of those things. The basic type of traffic that they're going to get. Now, the next thing you train them on is you want to train them on a new patient intake form, because the new patient intake form is sort of the rock that the position rests upon. This is something that you always want fully populated, because a good new patient intake form will do more than just get you their name, number, insurance, and all that kind of jazz. It's going to actually tell you a little bit about this patient so you can sort of figure out what it is you want to do with them or what their expectations are. Now, I have a sample one. I'm going to go through it a little bit that you can download on the episode webpage. It's from our scheduler and receptionist training on DDS success, which we'll put a link for that as well on the episode webpage. But, so I'll just go through a couple of the points, and I just want to point these up to you. So obviously, new patient calls in, you're going to get their name, number, and so on. You're going to find out if they've been in before, if they're a minor, who their guardian is. You want their address, you want their cell phone, you want their email. Now, what is the receptionist going to ask next? This is just on this form, and you can go through it, you can download it, but you're going to want to find out, how did they hear about your office? Now, this is a big deal because this is how you can tell if your marketing is working or not. And this usually gets completely messed up. How'd you hear about your office? Mail. Find out how'd you hear about our office? Well, I got a postcard in the mail. Did the postcard have, was it blue and blah? Yes, it was. And then you might have a code for that postcard, because then you can tell if that postcard is actually biting and getting you calls. All right. Or I heard about you on Google. Was it a paid ad or was it I heard you about it like this, right? So you want to find out how they heard about your practice. Then you would ask, when's their last dental visit? Maybe it was 12 years ago. Maybe it was 10 years ago. This starts to give you an idea, and I'll get into this in a little bit because this has something to do with the sales process, because believe it or not, folks, with the new patients, this is where the sales process begins. And obviously, if they were in a practice where you're going to have recent records or any records that you might want, you get the name of that doctor and so on, so you could request records, right? Now, we're going to ask them a couple other questions afterwards. we're going to ask them if they have any discomfort or dental concerns. Now, this is where a receptionist's ability to communicate is extremely critical because this patient may open up to the receptionist or whoever's taking this call, new patient coordinator, etc., at that point, and it starts to build rapport with the office and create a good impression. So I could ask you, well, do you have any discomfort or, any other dental concerns? Well, no. My back tooth on the upper right does hurt a bit. Okay, and they might ask them questions about it. I mean, have you had that looked at by the last doctor you saw? No, it just started hurting about 3-4 months ago, and I looked in the mirror, and there was a kind of a dark spot on it. And they start to communicate, which is what we want this prospective new patient to do, right? And then you'd ask him something like this. Is there anything the doctor should know to make your appointment more comfortable? Like, what do they want the doctor to know? Well, I lost a couple teeth 2 years ago, and I've thought about getting those replaced. I'm thinking about getting implants. Or, my teeth, they're crooked, and do you guys do those aligner things? Do you do any type of teeth straightening? This is stuff you want to note down because when you schedule this patient, this kind of tells you what's the doctor walking into. All right. Now, I'll mention this now, and then I'll go back to this new patient form. But I forget the episode. A few episodes ago, I talked about the new patient initial and the sales process a little bit. And we've had clients experiment with this a little bit, but the average new patient initial appointment is usually about an hour, right? And whether you see a new patient in hygiene or on your schedule, the doctor's schedule, is really immaterial. That's a personal choice. The doctor's going to end up doing an initial exam anyway, right? However it shakes out. But what we've run into in certain cases is you may have a patient who needs a lot of work and you got that hour and you got 5 minutes left in the hour and you've assessed what their treatment plan is. You really don't have adequate time to present that. So we talked about in those episodes, how to bring that patient back, right? To present that treatment plan because you don't want to present a treatment plan you don't have time to present. All right. Well, we've had some clients experiment with the idea of doing certain patients, new patient initials, or an hour and a half instead of an hour. Well, how do we determine who the hour and a halves are and who the hours are? Obviously, a 20-year-old college kid who's in great health is not going to be an hour and a half appointment. That's an hour. Whereas that patient who says they lost 2 teeth, they were looking at having replaced, or in other words, they've expressed or they have certain dental concerns that indicates that they might need an extensive amount of treatment. That's our hour and a half patients because we get to the end of the appointment where you've done not the whole appointment rather, but you've done your exam and you've worked up the treatment plan. You now still have a half hour to present this case. You see? But you start finding these things out with your receptionist. And this is what I always tell clients if they're going to try this is don't do this unless your receptionist knows what you're doing or what they're doing. Otherwise, you're going to go in for an hour and a half with a 10-year-old. You have nothing to do for the last 45 minutes of the appointment. All right, and then you might ask them what insurance they have, pre-med questions. I'll put the form up so you can look at it. But one thing I sort of want to inject in here, we talked about this in episodes relating to referrals, and I would definitely recommend you see where this fits. I leave this up to you. But you might ask insurance questions. You find out the name of the insured and the relationship to the patient. All right, so let's say you're talking to some guy, and he says, names the insurance, and the insured is his wife, and that's his relationship to his wife. Well, at that point, you might want to ask, well, does your wife have a dentist? No, as a matter of fact, she doesn't. She doesn't have a dentist. We just moved to the area. This is where you go, well, by the way, we have a new patient special, and I can get you both in on this, however you want to schedule it, but that you can actually ask for referrals, right? Yeah, we've been looking for a dentist for our kids too. Okay, great. If you're a family practice, you could schedule a whole family. This is an easy way to get referrals. So you could have one call and turn it into 4 new patients, right? I think the average household has 3 patients. Now, let's say you're not asking insurance questions, right? You could just ask them straight up, is there anybody in your household that's looking for a dentist or that needs, any dentistry done? Why not? There's nothing wrong with that. They're calling the dentist, and if you're asking that, what's the big deal? So I would definitely recommend adding that somewhere. Where to add it really depends on whatever you or your receptionist is comfortable with, but I would definitely add it, if appropriate, to your new patient call-in or intake form, right? So we have this up on the episode webpage, but that new patient call-in or intake form is extremely critical to the new patient process. So you want to make sure that this person is very familiar with it, that the form is always all filled out. They don't miss parts or whatever, because this is where you get the vital information that you need. Now, once they understand the new patient intake form, what am I going to do next? I'm going to get into how do they handle, assuming they know all this, the various scenarios they're going to run into, You know, do you take my insurance? How much do you charge for a crown? I'd like to schedule a second opinion. All of these things, questions they're going to be asked. Just like we don't want them messing up when they're asking basic practice questions, we don't want them messing up when they're handling questions like this. For this, I'm probably going to do an episode on this, specifically on phone skills, where we cover all these basic points. I will tell you now, on the episode webpage, we have something called New Patient Phone Scripts, where we go over the biggest things that a receptionist will run into. You can download that. It's on the episode webpage. We also have a whole course on this that we're about to drop on our online platform, DDS Success. I'll put a link to that as well. And in the MGE New Patient Workshop, we go over how to handle different scenarios. But for now, we'll throw that up there. You can download these scripts if you want to. And I should mention, if you download the scripts, we do when you go to download it, there'll be a little button you have to click or not click to ask for a free mystery call. If you want a free mystery call for your practice, you can get it right then and not right then and there, but you'll get it soon, and we can actually assess how skilled your receptionist is and what needs to be improved. So let's say you've trained them on the purpose, and they can answer questions and what the outcome's supposed to be, and they know how to use the new patient form, and they've got your phone scripts. What do we want to do as we're going through all of this? One thing that's critical before we let them loose on the phones is you want to drill these things. Now, what do I mean by drill? It's sort of like role playing. All right. You have them do it over and over and over again with someone who is skilled at this so that they don't get caught flat-footed when they're actually handling these calls. So you might drill the new patient form. The office manager pretends that he or she is a new patient, and your receptionist now has to handle them using the new patient form. And you find out what they mess up, and you correct it, and you do it over and over and over again until this staff member is comfortable and confident in their ability to do this. You could do it even the same thing with the questions. You could do the same thing with the new patient phone scripts, right? You just keep doing it until they actually get to the point where they feel comfortable. It shouldn't take that long. Then again, even before I let them loose on the phones, just where they have free reign, they can go for it. So let's say I've got this receptionist, I've drilled them on all these scenarios, they feel pretty comfortable in handling these things. All right, then I'm probably going to apprentice them a little bit. What do I mean by that? Meaning they may hear me listen to a new patient phone call. Maybe you have software that records your phone calls, which I guarantee you're not listening to enough. That's a whole other thing. Maybe you have that. They should listen to, your office manager should take some of these calls, and the other staff members should listen to these calls so they can see how it was properly handled. Now, if you're in a state where you can't record calls, then you're going to have to figure out another way to sort of bring this person along. One other thing you should do, even if you can record calls, is you would have this person answer the phone, to sort of seeing if they can do it. Do the new patient form. This is assuming you've drilled them on it. And the office manager or whoever's training them is sort of hovering nearby so they can jump in and salvage the call if this person starts to run out of gas or is doing it incorrectly. The idea being we want to make sure we don't mess up practice resources in the process of training. And one other recommendation I'd make, if there's any verbal training that your office manager or whomever is doing with this new receptionist or whoever's taking these new patient calls, you should record it. I've said this before, but audio-visual recording now is cheaper and easier than it's ever been before. If you have a new iPhone, gosh, the quality of these pictures and video is off the chain. You just get one of these, you can get a tripod, you put the iPhone on it or whatever mobile phone you have and you record this stuff. It's super easy. Just make sure that you have a centralized place to put all of your training. So those are the basics. If you do all this, and this is a lot of work as you can see, but again, how important is it? If you could take your receptionist from a 23% conversion rate to a 70 or 80% conversion rate, that's an extra, bunch of new patients, depending on how many calls you're getting, into your practice per month. Look at how much you're paying for a new patient now. That's how much you're saving at that point by doing literally no marketing. And then it also gives you confidence to expand your marketing efforts, which are going to help drive your growth, which, again, you should make sure you're doing your hygiene program right to do that as well. All right, so last point I want to mention, and this has nothing to do with training a receptionist, but it's just an interesting idea. I didn't know where it really fit. I've had a couple of clients do this, one in particular that had a lot of wins with it. But what he found was, his office was open 4 days a week and then, closed 3 days a week. He actually took a look and he was missing a ton of prospective new patient calls after hours, like later in the day. He had an answering service, but sometimes people don't want to talk to an answering service or, a voicemail. And he had, the same thing on the weekends. So what he did was he actually expanded the hours that his phone was answered. You have somebody doing it in the office, it was forwarded to his cell phone and they had access to the software. And he actually noticed that he got a 25% increase in his new patients just by doing that. You could kind of figure out how to platoon your staff doing this, or you could hire somebody to do it after hours, assuming they know what to do with a new patient. But it's really interesting. Increasing availability actually increased his new patients. Again, I know that wasn't totally related to what we were talking about. I wanted to throw that in there because I didn't know where it fit. Anyway, I know that was over 30 minutes. Sorry about that, folks, but I wanted to cover this in detail. Your receptionist is a critical part of the practice who answers your phone for all these reasons we've discussed. Really putting some attention on this position, making sure they're trained and having the right training materials for it, which I put those downloads up for you. You can also check out the new patient workshop and DDS success. Can mean the difference between success and failure. It could also mean the difference between your practice producing an extra $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 a month and helping more people, which is why we're all into this. That's all I have for this week. I hope it helped. Again, links to the download of the episode webpage. And if you have any questions about anything I covered in this episode, you can email me directly at jeffb@mgeonline.com, or you can go to the Contact Us page on Dental Business RX, our podcast website. And if you want more info about MGE, you can call us at 800-640-1140 or visit us online at mgeonline.com. Have a great week, and we'll see you at the next episode.